Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the services this morning of the Lake Norman congregation. We have a few people here this morning present and more people in the back room conducting the middle school, high school class. So there's a lot of people here at the building, but just not in this auditorium yet this morning. We appreciate you being here this morning, whether you're in person or at home watching. I know, hopefully my wife is out of bed in Alabama watching this morning. She said she was going to be, but so remind me not to say anything bad about her, Mike. Okay. This morning we have a pretty extensive prayer list, and there's a lot of people that are on here. I'm on page 3, so just if you don't have a copy of this, has this been sent out to everybody? No, I think Mike is going to send it out to everybody soon. But a couple new prayer requests this week. Ivory and Gabby Moss, will continue to remember them in their prayers, in our prayers about their situation, the adoption situation, everything. Gloria and Don Cole, the passing of their brother Lauren Thomas, and also their sister Marilyn Thomas has a second COVID test that's going on, and once that gets cleared, hopefully she can go back to her proper place of living. And then Rick Howard, his father was diagnosed with cancer this week. Students and teachers for successful and healthy school year. And then Arturo Haraz, father of Jose Haraz, Friends of the Reinboldts, had a stroke. And then Queen's here this morning. She was recently baptized into Christ last week. She's given the high five signs. So she's excited about that. Andy's out in the hallway out there hiding from me. So there's a lot of people on the prayer list this morning. We'll make sure we get this list out to everyone. And I appreciate the prayers for my mother. She's at home. Ann saw her yesterday. She's at home doing extremely well and survived all that stuff. So thank you for your prayers for her. I'm going to ask Mike if he'll lead us in prayer this morning.
Let's pray together, everybody. Dear Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to come before you this morning. We thank you for David and for the class and the things that he has prepared. Thank you for the opportunity to open the Bible and learn from your word. Lord, we ask that you we ask that you continue to bless us as a congregation and guide us. Help us as we strive to do what's right in this community. Help us as we strive to spread your word and be of an impact on the people around us. Lord, we're especially mindful this morning for a couple within our congregation in particular. We're mindful and thinking of Gloria and Dawn and the loss of their brother. We know that is painful and difficult, and we ask that you help us comfort them, help us to reach out and give them comfort during this time of loss. Also, Rick Howard and loss of his father. Lord, we pray for Rick and also for Rick's continued good health and that entire family. Lord, we're so thankful for Queen and her decision to put on Christ and become a Christian, be baptized last week. What a great event that was. We're so thankful for that. Lord, we are also mindful of Ivory and Gabby, and we know that you know that situation, and we just want you to continue to encourage them and lift them up. Lord, be with our congregation, and for so many that were not mentioned, be with our teachers that are and our students and our parents that are trying to begin a new school year, and grant them patience and strength as they encounter new challenges. Be with our college students as they're in a new environment. Be with David Silva. We appreciate the good work that he had done this summer, but know that he is starting a new year and starting some new challenges as well. Lord, help us as we continue to strive in everything that we do and all the circumstances that we find ourselves to be more and more like you. Help us to grow during good times and during difficult times, during healthy times, and during pandemic times. Help us to, no matter what our circumstances, continue to grow closer to you in our knowledge of the Word and in our service in your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Mike, for that prayer. I was fortunate to be in Nashville this past week again, and I ran into David Silva only because he texted me and said, let's have lunch. But had lunch with David. He's settling in. Yesterday he settled into his new dorm where he thought he was going to be. They actually moved him back to where he was, but not on the same floor, on the first floor. So he's back in the good building versus the old building. So David's doing well. And as I go to Nashville almost every week, I'll continue to check in on him, make sure he's staying focused on what he's supposed to stay focused on. And it looks like, from what I understand, the contributions have been extremely high in support of David and his education. So we thank the congregation for that, and those outside the congregation also that have been willing to give and to support him. I appreciate the fact that I get to teach the adult class every now and then. I do not like teaching the adult class. Let me repeat that. I do not like teaching the adult class because it's so hard to understand the dynamics of the congregation. And some people are new to the church, and some people are old to the church, and some people are conservative, and some people are liberal. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that they just see things differently. And so when you teach the adult class, there's always comments that come out of the class. Like my conservative friend Dennis McCurry cheered me on for wearing pleats and cuffs. And then I let him down today by not having pleats and cuffs on today. But it's interesting what people listen to and hear from your lesson, because you kind of relate to each other. I had somebody else mention to me, well, what about this verse? And what about that verse? And what about this? And I really like the way you teach because you bring it home so that I can understand it. But it's interesting to teach the adult class. When you teach teenagers, you can just kind of guide them down the path wherever you want to take them for the most part. And then you just set the anchor, and then you hold on to it as it comes to a rest, and you really can drive your point home. With the adults, there's always questions. Before I got home last Sunday, I had a phone call from Bill Weaver, and it basically said, what about Ezra? And so I'm going to ask you to turn back to Ezra, chapters 9 and 10. Because I mentioned last week about divorce, and we kind of got into it a little bit, but it's an interesting point to point out. That's kind of a dumb statement. It's interesting to look at Ezra and what happened about the intermarriage. And what happened following that intermarriage was roughly 110 people put away their wives and their children. I think it's more than 110, but I think that's the number I read. And I didn't take the time to count them, all listed in Ezra chapter 10, starting in verse 18 through the end of the verse, or through the end of the chapter. But it's interesting to look at it and just say, it's a tough situation. As elders, as you meet with people, you find them in this circumstance, and you have to take them where they are. In our society today, we see a lot of people that have been divorced. We see a lot of people that have been divorced and remarried, and divorced and remarried, and divorced and remarried again. And so what do we do? How do we handle that situation? What is it that we're supposed to do? We're commanded in 1 Peter 3, verses 1 through 7, to not put away an unbelieving partner. To not put away an unbelieving partner. But at some point in time, something happened that these people multiple times got divorced. So what do we do with them in today's society? Back in Ezra chapter 9, Ezra's dealing with a situation, and he appeals to God to forgive them, to overlook the sins that they've created by marrying outside of the church, if you will. He commands them, if you go back to Malachi chapter 2, verses 10 through 16, he talks about this situation again, or it's talked about there again. Ezra sets aside some time and he goes to God in prayer, and if you read it, he's anguished. He's literally down on his knees begging God to forgive this congregation, to forgive these people from sinning against God's plan. But in verse 8 it says, of chapter 9, verse 8 it says, but now for a brief moment the Lord God has been gracious in leaving us a remnant and given us a firm place in His sanctuary. And so our God gives light to our eyes and a little relief in our bondage. Though we are slaves, our God has not deserted us in our bondage. He has shown us kindness in the sight of the kings of Persia. He has granted us new life to rebuild the house of our God and repair its ruins. And He has given us a wall of protection in Judah and Jerusalem. Then go down to verse I can, my eyes will adjust here. Verse 11, it says, "But their detestable practices, they have filled it with our impurity from one end to the other." They've filled it with impurity from one end to the other. "Do not give your daughters in marriage to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons. Do not seek a treaty of friendship with them at any time, that you may be strong and eat the good things of the land and leave it to your children as an everlasting inheritance." So we see here that these people have intermarried. But if you go back in Malachi, they've actually put away their wives and married somebody else. They've married people from the land that they're in now. And so Ezra's faced with this situation. In chapter 10 it goes on, "While Ezra was praying and confessing, weeping and throwing himself down before the house of God, a large crowd of Israelites, men, women, and children, gathered around him. They too wept bitterly. Then Shechaniah, son of Jehiel, one of the descendants of Elam, said to Ezra, 'We have been unfaithful to our God by marrying foreign women from the peoples around us. But in spite of this, there is still hope for Israel. Now let us make a covenant before our God to send away all these children and their children, send away all these women and their children, in accordance with the counsel of my Lord and those who fear the commands of our God. Let it be done according to the law. Rise up. This matter is in your hands. We will support you, so take courage and do it.'" Now, Ezra rose up and put the leading priests and Levites and all Israel under oath to do what he had suggested, or what had been suggested. And they took the oath, and Israel withdrew from them before the house of God and went to the room of Jeroham, son of Elijahbid. While he was there, he ate no food and drank no water, because he continued to mourn over the unfaithfulness of the exiles. And then they set together this council to meet with these people one-on-one. Within 10 days, they had this council pulled together. And then they started meeting with these people individually. And they met with them individually over a period of almost 3 months. Throughout the winter months, they met with these people. So they didn't take swift action. They didn't just say, "Here's what we think, let's move forward." They obviously met, they thought about it, they talked about it, they were in prayer about it. I'm sure Mike can attest to this, Andy can attest to this as a former elder. Dennis and I can both attest to this. You do a lot of praying when you make decisions about people. You do a lot of praying when you talk about people's lives and their eternity. So the only thing I can think of is these guys really, really had a sincere heart, and they did a lot of praying about what was going on. In verse 11 it says, "Now make confession to the Lord, the God of your fathers, and do his will. Separate yourselves from the peoples around you and from your foreign wives." In verse 13 it says, "But there are many people here, and it is rainy season, so we cannot stand outside." So they brought this matter before the council. You go down to verse 16. So the exiles did as was proposed. Ezra the priest selected Ezra the priest selected men who were family heads, one from each family division, and all of them designated by name. On the first day of the 10th month, they sat down to investigate the cases, and by the first day of the first month, they finished dealing with all the men who had married foreign women. And then verse 18 through the end of the chapter, it lists all those people. There were the high priests. There were other priests. There were Levites. There were the singer and the gatekeeper and laity. So there was people from all walks of life. Now, should one person be judged more harsh than the other for marrying and doing what they were forbidden to do? There's a lot of speculation that the high priests were mentioned first. There's a lot of speculation that the other priests were mentioned second. And so they were put in order, almost as if like the elders should be held accountable more so than the members of the congregation. Well, we know that's not true, because we're all sinners and we all fall short of the glory of God. But in this situation, the Levites were the priests were specifically called out. Why is that? Because they knew the law. They were more educated than the others. They knew what the Old Testament law was. And they should have had a keener understanding, and they should have been able to say, stop, sooner than later. As older Christians, we have a responsibility. I was baptized back in 1977, and I say this without any hesitation. I didn't go to church every Sunday, Wednesday, Sunday night, every time the doors were open back then. I evolved into that. Okay? Now when we go on vacation, we rarely miss going to church. And when we're on vacation, even now, we can look at the internet and watch services. When I'm in Nashville, I can pick up the Wednesday night sarcastic comments by Jonathan about David McDonnell. I was watching. So we don't have any excuses. But I confess, I wasn't that good and strong back then. But we have a responsibility to grow away from the pagan world that we live in. Not separate ourselves, but grow away. And how do we do that? These guys, as Bill pointed out, this is an example where there was intermarriage and it wasn't sanctioned by God, and so there were drastic measures needed to take care of the problem. Now, some people that read this say, well, it was inhumane to separate those people from their parents, the children from their fathers. I don't disagree with that. And scholars don't disagree with that. But it was what had to happen at that particular time to get these people back on track. Now again, what do we do today? What do we do today? We have to take our children, our newly baptized brothers and sisters in Christ, where they are. And we have to deal with their situation where they are today. We can't make judgment on what's happened in the past. Now, are there things that should happen so that there's clarity in situations? Yeah. And that's the responsibility of the elders, but also the responsibility of all the members. It is not the elders' responsibility to deal with every sin and every situation. This example back in Ezra is a great example of a very hard situation that the elders, the leaders of this congregation, had to make. Now, you can sit here and study it, and some people say it was wrong, and some people say it was right. Some people would say it was too tough, and some people say it wasn't tough enough. But it's the situation for us to look at. It's also the foundation for us today to look at, and I ask you to go over to 1 Peter 3, verses 1 through 7. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. Who's got that? Anybody? Jonathan, you got that back there? First Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 7.
Likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives, when they see your respectful and pure conduct. Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of hair and the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear, but let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children, if you do good, and do not fear anything that is frightening. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered.
So I look around and I think of my relationship with the church, and I look around at people that I know got baptized. And we mentioned Steve Williams last week. He was a faithful attendee for 25 plus years. And then eventually somebody said, hey, would you like to study the Bible? And eventually he said, sure. And eventually he said, I need to be baptized. 25 years. 25 years. I look at Jude and Mary Ann. One was baptized before the other, right? Same day, right? Together. So you have both extremes. You have both extremes. You have people that were baptized together, and you have people that were baptized 25 years apart, or even more in Joanne and Steve's situation. But we have a responsibility to look at that situation with Ezra and understand that it's a foundation that God put in place for us today so that the new covenant has a completely different outcome. The new covenant says take these people where they are. And again, we can go in a long discussion in either direction. But in the same way, wives, be submissive to your husbands. If any of them do not believe the word, they may be won over without words by the behavior of their wives. I ask you to think about this for a second. How many of you have attended another congregation in the last 5 years? Okay. How many of you have been to a congregation where the majority of the people in the audience are wives. Every congregation of the Church of Christ, the majority of the people in the audience are females. Why is that? It's a hard question, isn't it? But we know the answer to that because most of the men are rebellious in some way. Most of the men don't feel it's necessary to come to church. And I say most, I'm not saying all. But we have to look at that as a fact, and we have to deal with it. Some of our spouses, some of the women here, as an example, are widows. Okay? We understand that situation. But we look at some of the other women and we say, where are your husbands? Where are they at? We have a responsibility to go and teach those men, be examples to those men, be example to those men and discuss with them what's causing them to be pulled away from the church, what's causing them to be distant from their wives in this particular situation. But I say all that to say, again, that in what we're talking about in 2 Corinthians, Paul's example is to separate, to come apart, to get away from pagan worship, specifically what he's talking about. But this question came up when we mentioned divorce last week, and so I thought I would address it today. Hopefully Bill, he's watching today. I'm sure I'll get a call from him again if I miss something. But the point is, we have that example and we have that foundation. The Old Testament was there for our learning. It's there for our understanding. And then how it applies to us today is that we have a different example today. Christ came so that we might all have hope of eternal life. So hopefully that covers that situation a little bit better than I did last week. And I mentioned, being an example to other men. I confess I'm not the greatest husband. I confess I'm not the greatest dad. I've had young men, I've had older men come to me and say, you need to fix this, or you need to change the way you're doing this, or I don't like the way you're doing this, or I don't like the way you're doing that. And for the most part, I just brush them off because it's just who I am, right? But literally, internally, I listen to what they're saying, and I study about it, and I think about it, and then I address it at that point in time. But it's got to happen in my time. So if you only hear it once, is it really going to stick? But when you hear it a second time or a third time or a fourth time, it starts to stick. So men of the congregation and women of the congregation, I challenge you that if we see a faithful woman whose husband's not faithful, and likewise if we see a faithful man whose wife is not faithful to the church, we have a responsibility to go out there and to teach them, to meet with them at their level, let the word convict them, but get involved in their lives and get involved so that they might have a happy marriage and live for eternity within the church. And I don't think we do that as much as we should in today's society. I think today we look at it and we go, well, they're going to work it out. They'll be okay. I'm sure it's not as bad as it seems. But reality is what? Reality is what? There's pain and suffering going on there. I can tell you at our house when somebody says, I don't want to do this, it's real easy. I just say, get in the car, we're going to do it. And typically they do. Now there might be some grumbling in the back seat, but they get it in the car and they do it. Okay? It's a different situation at my house, right? Now my children are not, two of my sons are not at home anymore. Do I have any control over them? I can threaten them. I can grab them by the collar. I can do lots of stuff to them. But I know this morning Jesse's at church, or will be at church in Kannapolis in Hickory with his wife, and Bradley should be here this morning. I can't force them to be here, but you can. Along with me, we can encourage them. And I ask you to think about that, not just from a marriage standpoint, but from a young person standpoint. Our college kids, are you encouraging them? Are you sending them letters of encouragement? Are people that are bound at home, or that are required to stay at home? I'm thinking of Deanna's dad. Just there's people that need our encouragement. There's people that can't be here this morning because of the COVID virus. Are we being an encouragement to them? Are we doing the things that we need to do to be an encouragement to them? So I'm off my soapbox for a second. Now let's go back to 2 Corinthians chapter 6. And the caption there at the beginning of this verse is, "Do not be yoked together with unbelievers." And we drove this point home last week, and I just want to reiterate a couple of points that I didn't get through last week. Paul is specifically saying, do not be yoked to unbelievers. But if you go back and you really study it, what he's really saying is, don't be involved in pagan worship or idol worship. And if you really study it and you look at what he's really saying, the beginning of this sermon goes all the way back to chapter 3. And this is the conclusion of this little mini sermon, if you will. It ends in verse 7. It says, "Since we have these promises, dear friends, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates the body and spirit, perfecting holiness out of reverence for God." And Paul's saying in his concluding words, he says, do not be yoked to unbelievers. Do not be yoked to unbelievers. There's a story of a man that Richard shared this story with me in some papers he gave me, that he was an heir to a beer company's fortune. And as he walked the streets going into this bar one night, he witnesses this woman trying to get this man to not go back into the bar. And the man backhands her down into the ground. The heir to that beer fortune made a decision right then and there that he didn't want anything to do with drinking and alcohol, and he literally walked away from his family fortune. Are we that courageous? Are we that willing to do the things that are necessary to walk away from pagans? What Paul's talking about here is, in verse 15 it says, "What harmony is there between Christ and Belial? What does a believer have in common with the unbeliever? What agreement is there between the temple of God and idols? For we are the temple of the living God." Whoa, we're the temple of the living God. So what is it we're doing? What is it that we're supposed to be supporting? And what is Paul really saying to us here? Are we supposed to worship idols? So what's an idol? We have to come up here with a modern day translation of what an idol is. Anything that replaces God. So Marie, if I'm sitting back there in a security position, if you will, for the church, as a greeter for the church, and I stand in the back and I see this several times during worship, what do you think? Are they paying attention to what's going on in services? Or are they busy updating their Facebook status or their Twitter account or whatever it is? Y'all may not see this, but the way the chairs are arranged now, you can easily get distracted within our own congregation, and you can look around and you can see members of our own congregation pulling out their cell phones, and they're not, flipping scriptures like Dennis is right there. They're tweeting or they're getting their Facebook account updated. Is that an idol? I told somebody this morning. I used to have a Facebook account. I think it was Maria. I used to have a Facebook account, and several years ago I get this Facebook. I look at it maybe once every 3 months or so, and I brought it up, and I see this. It says, "Is this David that I dated in high school?" And I went, delete, delete, delete. How do I get out of this? And I shut down my Facebook account. I have no desire to reconnect with some old girlfriend from high school. Okay. But it was also a signal to me that, there's too many people that see what I'm doing, and I don't need those people to be involved in my life anymore. So we have to ask this question: in today's society, what is an idol? What is an idol? We've made a decision at our house that we're going to get rid of cable TV because we have Roku and we have Amazon Prime and we have Netflix and we have Acorn. And we have charter cable or internet, whatever it is. Our TV hasn't been on all week except for the girls watch a movie here and there. During the week, they're not allowed to watch TV. but on the weekends they get 2 hours of TV. So we can control better what they see by getting rid of cable TV. We're also going to save $75 a month. Okay? Is the TV an idol? Is the TV something that we're worshiping? Is what Paul's saying here says, are we doing things to purify ourselves from everything that contaminates the body and the spirit? Is watching TV a problem? It depends. It depends. Is watching TV an addiction? It depends. And I pick that, but also it could be anything from eating too much, drinking too much, drinking sugared drinks, not drinking enough water. It could be anything. What's your idol? What is your idol today? And you have to answer that question yourselves. But Paul's telling us, it says, don't be associated with those that are creating problems for yourself. In the context that Paul's talking about here, they had people that were still eating meat, which was against Jewish law, that had been sacrificed to idols, right? But Paul's saying if you eat that meat at your own house, it wasn't sacrificed to idols, it's just meat at that point in time. He's saying don't be tied up in what it was originally purposed for, but it's leftover meat basically. It's a meat, it's just a food product at that point in time. But if you get in your chariot or your horse or get your sandals on and you walk down to the temple, to this God with a small g God, and you go in and you fellowship with those members of the community that are idol, that have sacrificed this meat to idols, that have sacrificed this meat, and they're going to say a prayer about it, now you're partaking or you're supporting that idol or that person's belief versus just having leftover meat at your house. So Paul's saying separate yourself. Understand the difference between the two. Christmas comes every year, right? And we celebrate it like it's a religious holiday in some cases. Some of our family members, my family members, are Catholic, or they profess to be Catholic. And they go to midnight mass. So if you're in town during Christmas, what do they expect you to do? What do they expect you to do? Go to mass with them, right? Can't do it. So we've purposely avoided going home at Christmas time just so we don't have that conflict. Okay? Call me chicken, call me whatever, but I've had this argument with my own mother. You can't kneel down when we kneel down? I'm like, I don't believe in what you believe in. Show me in the Bible. Let's talk about this. Let's have an adult conversation. And then it becomes a fight, and then it becomes an argument, and then somebody's feelings get hurt. So we avoid it. But we don't avoid the conversation. Do you let your children go worship with their friends to their churches? Is that not the same thing Paul's talking about here? Have we separated? Have we taught our children? My children don't spend the night on Saturday nights. They don't spend the night out on Saturday nights. Last Saturday night, we had a girl stay at our house. Guess where she was on Sunday morning? Right here in the chairs. If you come to our house on Saturday night, you're going to come to church with us on Sunday morning. And we tell the parents that. And the young lady that came last week, she likes David. She's known David. She met David, and they actually had a couple Bible studies together. The seed's been planted in that young lady's heart. Where it goes is up to God. But my point is this. Paul's saying, don't get confused about what an idol is. Don't be confused about where you're worshiping. But don't lead other people astray. Don't go down and have fellowship with these people in their temple, their little rooms. And back then, they would have these little rooms that would hold maybe 8 or 10 people. And they would worship the God, and they would have a meal, and there would be a prayer. That's worshiping the idol, isn't it? Do we do that? Are there people that you associate with that you shouldn't be associating with? Are there things that we associate with that we shouldn't be associated with? And we have to ask all those questions. And then he says in the middle of verse 16, it says, "For we are the temple of the living God. As God has said, I will live with them and walk among them, and I will be their God, and they will be my people." And he quotes back the Levitical law 26:12, in Leviticus 26:12. He quotes that. We have a responsibility to do what we're supposed to do. And if we do, God will be faithful as He's always been. But we have a choice to make. We have a decision to make. So now I'm going to get close to home. We talked about Facebook. We talked about TV. What about the foods that you eat? I love ice cream. I absolutely love ice cream. Last night I mixed chocolate chip with chocolate. Then I put chocolate syrup on it. Okay? But I can go weeks without ice cream. Okay? That's a choice. I know Andy King is addicted to riding a bike, but I know that he can go weeks without riding a bike as well. But then all of a sudden it kicks in, I got to go ride my bike. What are the things that you're addicted to? What are the things that you are dealing with? Are you working in a place that you really know you shouldn't be working? Are you participating in activities that you really know you shouldn't be participating in? Again, I'm not trying to step on your toes too much, but what's your idol today? Write it down for yourself. Ask yourself those questions. Is it more convenient to be on the lake on Saturday or Sunday afternoons than it is to plan on being at worship on Sunday? We have that problem. A lot of people have that problem. I mean, you think about it. You go out and you buy a $30,000 boat. What do you want to do? You want to use it, right? You want to be out on the lake. You want to enjoy it, right? Well, most of us work Monday through Friday, and so Saturday and Sunday is the only time you get to use your boat, right? Well, figure it out. Use it the rest of the week somehow. Don't do it on Sundays. Try to figure out how to be here on Sundays. In Deuteronomy 22:10, who's got the microphone? Deuteronomy 22:10. You got the microphone, Jonathan? Do you mind reading that?
Deuteronomy 22:10.
You shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together.
What does that mean? What does that mean? You should not plow with a donkey and what? A cow? What? They can't stay together, right? How come? One lumbers along and the other one drags along, right? Is that the reason? Is that the reason? Is there any other reason? Other than the Levitical law said don't do it, right? But that's really the reason. It's a simple process. One slows the other one down, right? And what happens when you get frustrated when you're dragging somebody along? You get angry, right? And you look back at your partner and go, come on, Mike, get up here. Or Mike looks back and says, come on, David, you're going too fast. You can't be yoked with somebody that's not running at the same speed, that's not doing the same things that you're doing. So Monday through Saturday, a lot of us only associate with people outside the church. We only associate with people outside of the church Monday through Saturday. And I know I'm stepping on toes. Deal with it. The only time we really are yoked with the same believers is on Sunday. Ladies and gentlemen, that does not work in the eyes of God. And we're doomed to fail if all we do is hang around other people 95% of the time. We have to surround ourselves with Christians that think like us, that walk like us, that talk like us, and that believe the same things that we believe in. It doesn't say to be separated from the world. It doesn't say give up on the donkeys or give up on the cows. It says put them together and deal with them individually. It says don't be yoked to the idols. Don't be yoked to the pagans. Be associated with those that are going to improve the spirit. In chapter 7, verse 1, it says, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates body and spirit, perfecting holiness out of reverence for God. So 7 days a week, the question is, are you doing the things that are necessary? It doesn't say pull out of the world. Paul's not saying pull completely out of the world. He's not saying that you can't be associated with non-believers. He's not saying that you shouldn't be involved in what's going on in the world. What is he saying? He's saying you have a job to do. And the only way you're going to be able to do that job really is to be associated with those like you, so that when you're in the world, you're strong enough and you have the knowledge to do the great command, which is to teach those that don't understand. And Paul's saying, do things that don't contaminate the body and the spirit. What does that mean? I mean, the body and the spirit, is that two different things? Is it two different things? I have to say, I was born in 1961, so I was in that generation that, hippie love and all that other garbage was going on. I have never in my life seen marijuana, except one time, and that's when it was in a package getting ready to be put in an incinerator at a police station. I've never done drugs. I did my fair share of drinking alcohol, but I never did drugs. That pollutant has never been in my body. Does that make me any better than anybody else? I'll tell you what it's hard to do is to associate with somebody that has had a drug addiction, that has been wrapped up, tied up, and lost their soul basically to drugs. I can't relate to those people. Now, I don't think I should go experiment with drugs just so I get an understanding of what they're going through. But likewise, I don't need to just throw that person away. I need to be involved in that person's life. I think what he's talking about here, the body is a separate piece. Should we put ice cream in our mouths 7 days a week? I wish we could, but I don't think that's healthy for us. Maybe it's healthy for you, but not for me. But he's talking about contaminating the body and the spirit. Do we pollute our minds with those things that we shouldn't be watching, shouldn't be doing, shouldn't be associated with? When I was a young man, the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition would come out. You guys remember that? Where were you at when it came out? Today, you just pull out your cell phone and you can find it real quick. It's out there. And you can blow it up. You can look at different things. The Victoria's Secret catalog comes out. Anybody ever looked at that thing? I won't tell you who, but somebody I know circled little parts on the women's bodies and things. That kid's parents basically said, well, at least he's not gay. I said, that's what you get out of that situation? But the whole point is this. There's so many things that come in the mail, just totally, you just pick up the mail, it's there. We didn't sign up for Victoria's Secret catalog, did we? We didn't sign up for the Sports Illustrated catalog, did we? But it's there. Flip up the internet and look at the news, and what do you see? So I challenge you to do this. Look at what Paul's telling us here. He's telling these Corinthian believers, look, you've got these Judaizers that came in, and they're trying to distract you. They're trying to pull you away. They're trying to, accuse Paul of certain things. They're trying to do all these things to cause a distraction within the church. And what he's saying is, be focused. Don't be idling. Don't be praising pagans and idol worship. Don't be involved in those things. Stay focused on what you already know to be the truth. Now, some of those young Christians, just like us today, when we're baptized into the church, well, in my old church we did it this way. Well, at my mom's church we did it that way. We still bring some of those old habits into the church. We have to be careful about that. What Paul's saying here is stay focused on what you know to be the truth and the things that you should be doing so that you're not distracted by the world around you, so that you can be the example to the world around you. If it was up to Dennis and I, everybody would be wearing pleats and cuffs, right? Because that's what we like. But that's not the law. But we still want to state our opinion, right? We're entitled to that. But what Paul's saying is that's just trivial stuff. Don't worry about that kind of stuff. Stay focused on the main point here, and that is don't be yoked to unbelievers. Don't be idol worshiping. Don't be involved with paganism. Be ready.
Just reminds me when Paul is equating our bodies to the temple of God, and we see Jesus' response when people are bringing the wrong things in the temple of God in the Gospels. It's definitely, I think it's a great analogy that Paul uses, because we see how God treats those things that are brought into his temple that should be there.
So people that bring their cell phones to church are easily distracted, and they can't just go to the Bible and stay on the Bible. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that and also for ourselves. So
Yeah.
if our bodies are temples of the living God, and we bring in those influences that shouldn't be there, those idols, we fill our minds with Sports Illustrated or whatever.
The pollution of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You wouldn't see the Jews doing that to the actual temple of God, and the time that they did, Jesus drove them out in spirits.
So again, we have an opportunity to set the right example. And Paul's saying to us, look, we're not talking about, this particular verse is not talking about marriage and divorce, although marriage and divorce is very clear. We can study that another day. But what does an unbeliever have in common with a believer? Not much, right? Not much. Other than we're both going to be judged on the judgment day, right? So we need to be careful about what we're doing. We need to be careful about who we're associated with. Yes, ma'am.
But
I didn't hear
we
you.
need to fill our spiritual side to keep us strong so that we can reach out to the world. Because,
It's a tough world out there. It really is. And what she said is you have to feel yourself, be prepared, be mentally and physically challenged and ready to go. I joke all the time with people. I say, I can outrun you. And they're like, you're a fat old man. You're 59 years old. You're not going to outrun me. And I'll challenge them, and I'll still go out there and run. It might be only 20 feet, but I'm going to run 20 feet. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about being mentally prepared. We're talking about being mentally ready and for the challenge that's before us. Every day, 7 days a week, we're in the world. Whether you believe it or not, you're in the world. And what's the example you're setting? Are you the guy or the lady that's opening the door for the person behind you? Something that simple. Something that simple could start a conversation. Are you the man or the woman that complains and gripes all the time? I have to admit, I gripe and complain some. Probably more than others. Because I still haven't found anybody that can drive as good as I can. That's when you're supposed to laugh, right? Okay. But we have our standards, we have our feelings. We need to put all that stuff aside. We need to really be focused in on challenging everyone around us to stay focused and to understand there's lots of pagans, there's lots of things that distract us from the church. And I go back to chapter 7, verse 1 again, and it says, let us purify ourselves from everything that contaminates body and spirit, perfecting holiness out of reverence for God. When you confess that you sin, who do you confess to? You confess to God, right? And we have to give reverence to God because God's the one that has control over us. We have decisions to make, but we need to give reverence to God. We need to understand how important God is in our lives. And sometimes we just kind of slough it off and go, well, I sinned. I made a mistake. I screwed up. In reality, we need to be in reverent prayer to God and seek that forgiveness from God and seek that understanding with God that we are sinners and we need help getting that fixed. So hopefully that takes care of all of chapter 6 in the first verse of chapter 7. And next week we'll finish chapter 7 because it's a pretty short chapter. And then we'll get into verse 8 and talk about generosity and giving, or chapter 8. Any questions or any comments before we close? We're already past our time, but it's okay. Thank you everyone for being here this morning. Look forward to having you in worship here in just a few minutes. Thank you.